Hi, my name's Rob from the Keeler section of 1st Bingham Scouts. In this activity we're going to make a raft using some rope work and some pioneering skills. So these are some rafts that we made earlier. These were model ones, but this time we're going to make one practicing the knots. So we're going to use the Clove Hitch, a square lash and a diagonal lash, and let's see how we get on. What I will do is suggest that you keep pausing the video, have a look at the Scout resources to explain how to tie the knots, because sometimes it's quite difficult to follow it when you're watching a video. There are also apps available. Make sure you do ask your parents about going on the internet or downloading apps first though, please do. Okay, so let's get started. So what we need is some lengths. I'm using bamboo that I've chopped down and cut up. So we've got about 8 lengths roughly the same size, another 2 slightly smaller ones, and then 1 longer one at the end, which we'll try and make a mast with. So what you do, get the 2 shorter ones that they're going to be the underneath. That's what we're going to tie onto. We've got I've got 2 lengths of string, about 1 meter long. So first thing is we need to tie on a clove hitch. So at this point, if you're not familiar with it, it might be worth looking on the Scout resources. So over, under, so it makes a cross, the crossover. Make sure you've got enough left, enough room so that you can tie the clove hitch underneath. It is a bit fiddly. It's actually easier in some ways when you're doing it in Scouts and you're actually using pioneering poles and proper rope. Sometimes it's easier to control it. So what we're going to do now, first off, is do the square lash. So put the first long piece over the top, over, under, hope you can follow this, over, under, and you keep doing that over and under. So make sure you keep it tight in together. You do not want it loose, or else it'll fall apart. And if you're making a real raft, you certainly don't want the raft falling apart when you're in the middle of a river. So keep going over and under, and then when you've done a few and it's nice and tight, you can then go round and round, and that binds it together. So you must remember to do the round and round bit. Don't just keep going over and under. So round and round, and it binds it together, and it makes it really nice and strong. So once you've done the first one using the square lash, so the next ones we're going to use a very simple diagonal lash. So if you were doing it for real and you were wanting it to be super strong, you'd probably do a square lash on each one. But for the purpose of this, let's do a simple diagonal lash. So up from underneath the last one, over the top, going across the next one, and then back over itself, so it makes a cross. So you're doing 2 diagonals, and then back, underneath, ready for the next one. And we're just going to do that all the way along. And at this point, I suggest you fast forward the video, or I'll fast forward it, and you just keep doing the same thing. So you keep making this really nice, strong diagonal lash all the way. So now the main thing is, some of it is quite fiddly, so take your time. Don't worry if it starts going wrong, you make a mistake. Just rewind a little bit, undo the knot a little bit, and have another go. And don't forget, this is practice, so if you need to make it a bit simpler, you can do. So keep going all the way along, like that. And as you can see, it's building up. You've now got almost a nice base. We do one side. I will warn you, the first side is easier. Don't do what I've just done and get yourself literally tied in knots. It's gone slightly wrong, but don't worry. And then the last one at the end. So if you've got enough room you can do another square lash on the last one, or maybe do a double diagonal. As I say, for the purpose of this, we're practicing and we're making a model, so we're not actually floating down the river on this. At the end, hopefully you've got enough left that you can do another clove hitch. So remember, over the top, back over, so it makes a nice cross. Loosen it a bit so that you can get the working end of the rope, or in this case the garden string, back underneath both of them, so it goes through underneath both of them, both underneath the cross, and we're just going to tie it off. Now, if you were wanting to make this and keep it, you might want to trim the end. You wouldn't normally cut rope. I wouldn't suggest you normally cut rope, but for the purpose of making a model, you can tie it off and neaten it up. So the next thing is, we've done one side like that. We now need to do the other side. This does get a bit more awkward when you've got the second side, because you've got more of the raft in the way. But we do exactly the same thing. So get another piece. You could even just have one long piece, but it does get a bit more awkward. The longer the rope, the longer the string, the more awkward it is. But what we're going to do is same as before. So perhaps the opposite corner, put the square lash on there and work back along to tie on the other side. So it's exactly the same as before. I say there are some really good scout resources on the internet to show you, to practice, to teach you how to tie the knots. So let's start again. There are also videos, YouTube, animated. I say there's an app with animated instructions how to tie knots. Some really good resources out there. So and sometimes you can slide the knot along to make it into exactly the right position. So let's get the square lash on first. As I say, it is harder now that there's more of the raft in the way, so you have to keep threading it through, over, under, and over, under. And I might only do 2 over and unders with this one, and then I'm going to just wrap it round. Remember to wrap it round to bind it tightly together. You do want to make sure that it's nice and tightly secured. So right, so now it's nicely bound together. We're going to do exactly what we did before. Do the simple diagonal lash over the crossways. Now this is where it does start getting a bit tricky, but you can still do it. You might have to keep sliding them out of the way, otherwise it starts getting difficult. So what I suggest is keep practice this. It is tricky, so make sure it is nice and tight. And you might have to keep threading it through. You might need, if there's enough room, you might be able to poke it through. You might need to get a pencil to push it through the gaps. And just keep working all the way along. So you can see it's getting more and more fiddly. So you might, with bamboo's actually quite handy because it's so smooth. You can actually slide it out of the way. Now, obviously, a finished thing, you don't want it to be sliding, so you've got to make sure that the last one is nice and tight, because you do not want it sliding off. If it was with rope and pioneering pole, they tend to be a bit easier to work with in some ways. So keep going along. making the nice cross shapes on the top. Like that. Now then, we've got to the last one. So again, we might just do a double to get it nice and tight. If it does move slightly, you can usually, see it can twist a little bit, but you can usually tease it back into so it's nice and straight. And then what I'm going to do is, like before, I'm just going to tie it around, bind that last diagonal one. So it does get a bit fiddly towards the end. And then we'll tie it off onto here. And tying it off is the same way as tying it on. So use a clove hitch if you can. This is going to be really fiddly. Now if you were doing it for real, you'd have at least 2 people helping you, because you'd need someone to lift it up while you tie it on. You might even need a few people if it was a big raft. But there we go. We've now got a fairly solid raft. We've got the underside. You can see underneath you've got the 2 strips that it's tied onto, and then we've got a nice solid base on there. You can then, if we're feeling lucky, is as it happens, there's a bit of a gap there, so I can try and push through one remaining stick, one of the bamboo pieces, and we can try and tie that on. Now this is very tricky. What we might have to do is tie it on and push it through from the bottom. You could also, if you knew that you wanted to have a mast in the first place, we could have actually, might have been more sensible, tied the mast on to that first one before we started, because it's a lot easier to do when it's not attached to the whole raft. So let's give it a go. So push it through, and a bit like the square lash, we're going to try and do, oops, over, under, over and under. But then what I'd like to try and do is attach it to the front one and to the second one. So this is where you might need a pencil to feed it through. So over and under, and then I'm just going to do a couple. You might want, if you wanted to make a model that you wanted to keep, you'd probably want to go around a few more times than I've just done, and then feed it through. And what we need to try and do is feed it through and then back in between the second and third one. So again, it's the same principle, over and under, but we're trying to tie it onto 2. So it's a square lash on the front, and it's a sort of a square lash on the second one. Like that. And I say, for the purpose of this, I'm just going to do a couple, and then I'm going to tie it, bind it on. Remember the round and round to bind it on. As I say, if you were making a mast for real, you definitely want to do more than just 2 rounds of over and under. So, but there we go. You might need to move it a little bit, especially when you're tightening it, but then we can tie that off. You need to make sure you don't run out of rope or string, as I'm about to do. It's going to be a bit tight. Might have to do a simple half hitch. Oh, there we go. Right. Oh, just right. There we go. We've now got a raft. It's got a simple mast. We can put a flag on it. I'm going to steal the flag that we used on the model ones earlier and put that on. There we go. And there we've got a very simple bamboo raft. Obviously, you can... bamboo's kind of handy because it tends to be nice and straight, and you can easily cut it down so it's the right length. But you don't have to use bamboo, you can use normal sticks. Just try and make sure they're as straight as possible. They need to be fairly strong because you need to really bind the knots together. But hopefully if you do this, you'll have used a clove hitch, a square lash, and a very simple diagonal lash. So enjoy, have fun, hope you give it a go. Bye.